Welcome to Gifted Underachievers, the podcast for mid-level creatives with delusional ambitions. In this segment, Pat and James start to discuss whether it's worth exploring grants in the U.S. considering the current political environment. That then leads to a valuable discussion of keeping aligned with the audience.
You know what's I'm wondering now, because the grant landscape in the US has become very tenuous, like sort of flattened out, because nobody knows what's happening. I mean, I don't know if anybody knows what's happening, but there's a court case, but it's going to take time to work its way through the system. So I'm wondering if we should focus more on international grants because we do have listeners in 59 countries.
Well, I think I need to focus on the American grants because that needs to be fleshed out. And the other piece of that is I feel like as an American applying for an international grant, even
Yeah.
though they may say we're not going to stack the deck against you, they're going to stack the deck
Oh
against you.
yeah, sorry, I didn't mean the applications from us. What I meant was when we're researching people who've won grants, we might
Oh,
want to research people in England who've won grants over there and then say, what's it like over there?
oh,
How does that work over there?
yeah, no,
Australia,
yeah.
different countries, so that because there's so much uncertainty in the US, although personally, of course, you'd want to apply for US grants, then you don't have to travel,
Mhm.
or as far and all that stuff. If it's a residency, um, for everybody else who's listening, the US is sort of a giant, open source. So nobody's going to care what the grant system there is unless they're in the US, which most of our listeners are. So it's still good to do some
Yeah,
research on that, but we can't give any definitive kind of advice because it's all in so much flux with Trump in the White House.
yeah. Well, so listening through the highlights reel for Richard was
Yeah.
really, it reminded me of a lot of stuff that he had said that I thought was really interesting. And so I'm really curious that so it's not just that the NEA and the NEH are going away,
Yeah.
but the places that they support that were resources to get published, so like you have all these literary journals now that are pleading for money because they
Right.
lost their funding, right?
Yeah.
And so, what is that going to leave? What is
Yeah.
the impact going to be on publishing? And Richard said, had this thought that if you're too dependent on grants, it divorces you from your audience.
Yeah. The commercial.
And so I wonder if, amidst all the really stupid, bad, horrible stuff, maybe it'll get these literary journals and others to be a little bit more cognizant of the audience.
Exactly. That's a good point. I was wondering the same because as soon as you said literary journals, I was thinking about how many hundreds of them there are, how they each, have a different, I guess their systems are all similar, but they each have a different vibe, somewhat transgressive fiction, somewhat, you
Mhm.
know, other things going on, sometimes they have themed issues. I was thinking, why not have 25 or 30 really, really good literary journals that are organized by more than one university, like that they band
Mhm.
together and like instead of having all these little silos of lit journals, actually consolidate and make it pay for writers because if there aren't 1,000 to choose from, people are more likely to buy one. It's just that as
Mhm.
a lit journal person, well, I'm not one because there's too many. And I don't want to. I loved Glimmer Train because it always had
Yeah,
stories I liked, but
they
there's
were really
only a
good.
few where I like every story. And I know that's not the point
Yeah.
of them, but anyway.
Well, they were really good. They just had a sensibility that probably spoke to something for you and I. The other
Yeah.
one is The Sun, where, again, I don't like everything that's in it, but I like most of what's in it.
Which one is it?
And The Sun,
Oh,
and that's down in North Carolina.
mm,
And you should, if you have, an essay or something like that, you should think, you should send them something.
mm.
But they're really good. And and then I saw an issue of like the Missouri Review that I thought was really good. But then, because Monique got me a subscription to this service that sends you two literary journals a month.
Okay,
They're
cool.
all different.
Yeah, that's cool.
They're all over the place. And I go through, so I get the two each month and I go through them often in a very short amount of time because there's just nothing that resonates.
Yeah, that's what I find. And so a lot of them come out at, so the whole, I'm not for cutting funding to the arts because the arts need funding.
Oh
But
yeah, yeah.
I
No,
kind of agree that there might be an opportunity. The lit journals are a weird little arm of the arts that don't, it's almost like they express MFA program aesthetics more
mhm.
than they actually mean something to readers.
Yeah, yeah, and they definitely, there's a lot of issues. I
Literally.
would, yeah. Bow, bow, bow. There's a lot of issues that I find with them that go down political, social, kind of
Yeah,
holes. But and so it's not that I don't think all audiences should be served, but it feels like the mass of them are trying to serve the same audience,
that's exactly right.
and it's not a very big one.
Yeah.
So they're not growing their audience.
No. Yeah, perfect. And then, you have these really, really old commercially viable basically digests or journals that come out regularly, but they're not literary, but like Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine. But if you
Yeah,
read it, those stories are of a very high caliber. They're
yeah,
just built around a certain type of writing that people will pay to read month after month after month because they
yeah.
do it well. They know what they're doing and they do it really well. So, is there something to be said for that? If there was a literary journal just focused on stories about trains, would I buy it every month? You bet your booty I would. But maybe that's just as stupid a way to organize literary journals as the current way, which is around some MFA program, you know, um, like kids, basically, kids that are taking people in their 20s who are doing an MFA and what they think is cool and what they've workshopped with their instructors and getting them to curate a collection of stuff that's like what they like to
Mhm.
write and their friends like to write. It's just so, it seems, I don't want to be cruel, but it seems very pointless.
It does seem rather pointless and self-serving.
Yeah, and
And it also
maybe I
feels
have
like,
that wrong.
well, it also feels like don't submit to our literary journal, but all these other colleges we're all connected with so we can publish everybody else so our MFA programs don't run dry.
Yeah.
Um, and that's like more like a feeling you get as opposed to like somebody's actually literally said that.
Nobody's ever said that, and honestly, it's a feeling. I mean, there's an old journal up here, it's been around forever, Prism, which is part
Mhm.
of the University of BC's creative writing department. And I don't subscribe, so I should just shut my mouth. But the ones I've read, there's one thing in there that I think is high quality, and the rest seem to be just sort of fulfilling a page count thing or like a this particular voice has to be heard thing. And I don't think that that's commercially viable. Voices need to be heard if
Mhm.
they can make the reader turn the page. That's all
Yeah.
that writing is for. That's what it's for.
Yeah.
It's about the
Yeah.
reader. It's not about the writer.
Yeah. Well, and Richard spoke to that too, where, if your reader has to work harder than the writer, then
Yeah.
you're not serving,
Yeah.
which I thought was really good. And then part of this discussion too speaks to like elitism, right?
Yeah.
So, if you're in with the in crowd, then, and that's, I'm not saying that this is true. Again, it's feeling.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're in the in crowd, you have a better chance than if you're on the out crowd,
Yeah.
which, how do you get it to the in crowd? Maybe that's a, question to explore. And I think this, speaks to like a broader why people are so frustrated elitism and privilege points to this: what are the metrics? What are people trying to do? What are people trying to accomplish? Um, Intentional, unintentional ladder pulling up, those kinds of things. And I think, for a lot of us writers and creatives, when you go to different grants and, all these things where you have to apply, and it's, a juried selection process,
Mm.
wonder, is it biased against me because I don't have this credential, that credential? And I have no idea. I have no idea.
I
But
don't
you
think that
see these hints,
they go by the project. They don't go, I mean, if you're talking about residencies, yeah, maybe, but not for funding for projects. They can't be,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I don't, I'm just, getting into anywhere that's juried. How do you, I guess maybe the way to phrase the question is, given this now, sensitivity to in-group, out-group elitism, those kinds of things. How do literary journals, arts magazines, all these places that select, that have criteria, how do they avoid, communicating something that they don't intend to communicate so that people can have real, faith in the process?
Yeah, that's a good question. My impression is, and so I think we need somebody on here to talk to it because to speak to it, and probably from more than one journal because but I don't want to get too writer centric
Right.
on this show. It's not that important. Most people don't give a shit about literary journals, to be honest. Like your
Yeah.
average, I know many, many avid readers who just would never pick one up because who cares? They're not writers. Writers are the ones who read literary journals, and the people who appear in them, I think a lot of it has to do with just like it did in Charles Dickens' time and Wilkie Collins and Edgar Allan Poe. It's who you know to get your stuff read. There's a slush pile. And the thing I liked about Glimmer Train was they published writers who'd never been published because they did not they read blind.
Right. Maybe we could do a segment where it looks at, you know, how do we, from the outside looking in, how do we believe things are fair? Because, like, something you were talking about when we were talking about this grant that you just not got, was that it's so open, right? How can you not feel that they're fair and trying to do their very best?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's like the two sides. Like, if you're on the grant or whatever side, the jury, how do you project, fairness and all that kind of stuff? And if you're on the other side, how do you, figure out what's your paranoia and what's not?
Yeah, totally. That's it. You know, uh, it's uh it's so easy to feel mystified by how things are awarded or you
Yeah.
know and
Yeah.
everywhere, like in every aspect. And I think publishing is actually one of the last bastions of, oh, we are going to publish it because it fits with our imprint and we like it. Like that publisher I like, man, Paul Dry Books.
Hmm.
They publish very idiosyncratic stuff. I think U of Chicago Press publishes pretty good books.
Hmm.
And that's not opaque. Like how to send them stuff. It's not a mystery.
Hmm.
But everything else is very mysterious in the creative world, to me anyway. Maybe I mean, I've paid attention to publishing, but I haven't paid attention to other fields. But I
Yeah.
was talking to somebody who's an actor, and they said now everything you do your audition reels, you just send them in. You don't actually go in usually.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like a slush pile thing. If you
Hmm.
say, because they give you instructions, say your name, where you're from, can you commute to New York or whatever. And if you say that in the wrong order, I'm from New York, my name's this, you're out. They don't want to see the
Wow.
reel.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's like, and I said, oh,
That happens. That happens with us.
it's the same thing with submissions, right? You don't fulfill the exact requirements. They don't have to look at it, which saves them a lot of time because they want people to read the instructions, but it's just so it's clear in some ways, but it's also like I think there's just too much shit. I think there's just too much writing
Yeah.
competing
Yeah.
for too little space.
Yeah. No, it's true. They say the internet and computers have democratized creativity, but they've allowed a lot of people who really don't put the work in to flood, um, all the channels.
Yeah, that's well said. Well said, JB. Yes. Yeah. Because it is the channels being flooded is the problem, actually.
Channel flooding.
Channel flooding. Don't do it. But there's no, it's so subjective whether your own work is ready to submit. Like there's so much hope in the
Yeah.
beginning. So little discernment.
Thanks for listening to Gifted Underachievers, the podcast for mid-level creatives with delusional ambitions. We'd love to hear how we're doing, so please leave a comment, join our chat page, or send us an email at giftedunderachievers@substack.com. You can listen to us on Spotify, iTunes, and anywhere else you like to get your podcasts. Also, please hit the share and or subscribe button. It's a morale boost for the both of us. Thanks, and have an awesome day.